You are landing. Suddenly, a bright green flash lights up your cockpit and interferes with your vision. You have just witnessed a laser illumination. What do? Laser pointers are sometimes used irresponsibly. Incidents where lasers have been aimed into cockpits while aircraft are in flight have increased dramatically in the past decade. Even though the FBI and Homeland Security have found little evidence that laser incidents are terrorist-related, the FAA and other government agencies are very concerned about these incidents. Laser strikes bring risk to the aircrew and their passengers, because any laser strike can have adverse effects on the vision of the aircrew and potentially their ability to safely fly the aircraft. One way to mitigate the risks presented by laser exposures is through education and training of aircrew, so they are prepared to successfully handle a laser event. The FAA and the U.S. Air Force have been working together to study the effects of laser exposures on aircrew. They have prepared this video to increase aircrew awareness of cockpit laser incidents. This video presents a brief history of cockpit laser events, explains what a laser is, why lasers can be dangerous, and the potential hazards of exposures to aircrew. It will also describe several actions aircrew can take in response to a laser strike. The goal is to educate aircrew regarding laser events, how to react and how not to react, and how to fly the aircraft safely. Now to give us a pilot's perspective, here is retired L-1011 Delta Airlines pilot, Captain Bill Connor, Ph.D.
Well, our incidents in this country are a lot more common than people are aware of through the news media. For the last 6 months, we've had over 300 incidents in this country alone, and since 2004, we've had 1,700 incidents. Now, the problem is that now it is spreading worldwide. We've had reports in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and Japan. And I think thus far that we've never had a very serious injury, and also we have never had an accident where we've lost an aircraft or damaged an aircraft due to laser illuminations. But because we haven't lost one, doesn't mean that the potential is not out there for a very serious incident to happen.
Both airplanes and helicopters have been targeted, usually during the most critical phases of flight: approach, landing, and takeoff. Lasers are a threat to air safety, and steps have been taken by several countries, including the U.S., to enact legislation defining penalties for purposefully illuminating aircraft, and to punish individuals who do so with fines and/or jail time. In fact, several states in Australia have banned laser pointers and imposed mandatory jail time for possession without a lawful reason. Laser strikes have become increasingly common events since the 1990s. Many earlier incidents were accidental illumination from laser light shows. That problem was solved by the laser entertainment industry, the FDA, and the FAA working together to establish regulations and procedures to minimize the probability of laser exposures to aircrew from these shows. Regulations were implemented restricting laser shows to project into critical zones around airports. Laser shows are now required to obtain a letter of non-objection from the FAA and are required to plan their shows and control their lasers to prevent aircraft illuminations. Unfortunately, the gap in laser incidents left by regulation of the light show industry has been more than filled by persons in the private sector shining lasers at aircraft. Most laser incidents are believed to be nuisance or pranks and primarily involve laser pointers. Nearly everyone knows what laser pointers are. They are handheld devices used to point to objects projected on a screen during a presentation. They are also used outdoors to point out objects in the night sky. The most common laser colors are green and red, but other colors are also available. Laser pointers are inexpensive and available online and at retail outlets like Radio Shack, Office Depot, and Office Max, and can be purchased by anyone. Laser pointers are Class 2 or 3R devices. Class 2 lasers have a maximum output of 1 milliwatt or 1/1000th of a watt. They are safe because of the blink reflex that naturally happens when we are suddenly exposed to a bright light. Class 3R devices have an output between 1 to 5 milliwatts.
The maximum permissible exposure, which is a safety standard, can be exceeded with Class 3R pointers even with the blink reflex if the beam is close to the eye or the focus is maintained at one spot. However, the chances of damage to the eye are still small because the maximum possible exposure is below the damage threshold. Most of the laser incidents have occurred in the early evening between 7 and 11 p.m., or at dusk and at night. Lasers pose the highest flight risk at night because the dark adapted eye is many times more sensitive to light, and the laser is much brighter relative to the background than during the day.
I think the thing that makes the laser beams so dangerous is that where we have encountered the laser illuminations is in the critical phases of flight. And the critical phases of flight are basically approach and landing and takeoff. These are areas where there is a very high workload on the crews, not only a vision workload, a hearing workload, a procedural workload, and you're also low to the ground and maneuvering the aircraft to the airport. Now, with other light sources, like light bulbs or searchlights, things like that, the rays or the light is dispersed very quickly. But with a laser, its technology uses a very highly collimated beam of light. And once this enters the eye, it can be magnified up to 100,000 times back onto the retina.
Let's talk a little bit about lasers. As you can see, lasers come in all shapes and sizes. However, they are all electronic optical devices that emit light that is concentrated in a very narrow beam. This means a lot of energy in a little space.
Different types of lasers emit at different wavelengths. The human eye can see light with wavelengths between 400 and 750 nanometers. Different wavelengths are associated with different colors, as shown in the illustration of the spectrum. Although the eye can see all of these wavelengths, it is not equally sensitive to them. The sensitivity of the eye to bright lights is greatest in the middle of the spectrum, or in the green to yellow regions. Because of the differences in sensitivity, a green laser will appear many times brighter than blue or red lasers of the same power.
What makes a laser potentially dangerous is the amplification of light by the optics of the eye.
Even a laser pointer emitting just 5 milliwatts can appear blindingly bright. Other factors that contribute to how dangerous a laser can be are how powerful the laser is, which roughly equates to its brightness, its wavelength, which we already know favors green lasers, how long the exposure is, how much the beam diverges or spreads out, and the distance from the laser. Divergence and distance are two important factors in airplane laser incidents. Because of divergence, as you move away from the laser, the diameter of the beam is increased, which distributes the light energy over a wider area, and as an end result, decreases the amount of light that can enter the pupil of the eye and cause visual effects. Exposure duration is another important factor, since the longer the exposure, the more light is absorbed by the retina, and the chance of damage increases. Fortunately, in a cockpit scenario, it is most likely that the laser strikes will be brief and appear as flashes. This is due to the fact that it is difficult to handhold a laser on a target at long distances. Even a large stationary object like a water tower is difficult to hit, even though, because of divergence, the beam is quite large. The hazards to the aircrew are primarily to the retina of the eye, not the skin, the airframe, or avionics. The laser strikes on aircrew occur at distances that are well beyond the hazard distances for skin. As for the airframe, the only lasers currently capable of causing damage are military lasers that cost hundreds of millions of dollars and that are still in development. The effects that visible lasers can have on the eye and vision range from nothing more than the appearance of a bright light to severe and permanent physical damage to the eye. In the scenario of cockpit laser illuminations, permanent physical damage to the eye is highly unlikely. The lasers involved in cockpit laser strikes, for the most part, will not cause physical damage to the eye due to variables such as length of exposure, intensity, and/or proximity.
On the other hand, even lasers no more powerful than laser pointers are very capable of causing non-permanent visual effects that include startle, distraction, glare, and flash blindness. It is the visual effects that lasers can produce that are the greatest threat to aircrew.
Well, the problem you run up against with a laser illumination is the unexpected of the laser illumination. And the pilot's response, as we've had in one of our previous laser illuminations, was the pilot thought another aircraft had come into his airspace with the landing lights on. And of course, this created an enormous startle effect. With startle, this is an involuntary response to an unexpected event. And with this, it alters your physical, visual, and mental aspects as the way that it changes your attention away from the normal flight path of the airplane while you're trying to find out exactly what's happened to you and have any idea that it happened to the rest of the crew. And do you have any idea how long this is going to be, that your vision is going to be impaired? So with this, with the conditioning, on startle recognition and response, you have 4 phases that you go through. And one phase is distraction, then disruption, disorientation, and incapacitation. Now, in distraction, if you've been trained well enough, when you recognize the laser illumination, it can be just distraction, which is just a momentary attention shift away from the primary flight task. If it's a disruption, this means an extended time away from your primary flight task that you're having to have dedicated selective attention to reestablish your normal control. Now, when you get into the disorientation, where a person at that point will probably be in some type of a turn with the aircraft to where they're not really flying straight and level, and when this happens, the person loses the perspective of their situation awareness as far as our spatial awareness of the between the direction of flight and the surroundings. And this just starts to get to be very critical. And it finally evolves over into incapacitation. And this is where the crew member has lost not only situation awareness, but spatial orientation with reference to the outside world. And the incapacitated crew member should immediately transfer control of the aircraft to the other pilot, because he no longer can reliably determine the aircraft's altitude, attitude, or direction of flight, which becomes very critical.
Which visual effects will occur as a result of laser exposure depends how much energy strikes the eye. As mentioned earlier, this depends on the power of the laser, how much the beam spreads out, how far away the laser is, and very importantly, whether it is day or night. Let's look at these effects.
The first effect is the sudden appearance of a bright light. Let's see that again. Note that the runway is still visible. However, an event like this, when unexpected, may cause a startle response that can distract a pilot, even if the light is not bright enough to cause significant glare. Also, the fact a bright light appeared unexpectedly may generate fear that an even brighter light may be coming. In this example, the light is being flashed intermittently. This is typical of most laser strikes on cockpits because, as we showed earlier, it is very difficult to maintain a small beam on a small moving target at long distances. The visual effects of a laser are many times greater at night. In this footage taken inside the FAA 737 simulator, we see that during daytime, even a bright laser that is on continuously does not significantly impair vision, and the pilot is able to continue with his takeoff. However, most laser incidents occur in the evening, so we will continue with our effects examples taken in a night situation. As laser intensity increases, glare can become a problem. Glare is an obscuration of vision that is like a veil of light placed over part of the visual scene. Glare is present only while the laser is on. The amount of area obscured will depend on the intensity of the laser light. It will also depend on its color. As stated before, green light is more effective than red or blue light in stimulating the visual system. Therefore, a green laser of the same power as a red laser will create more glare.
As laser intensity and glare increase, a point is reached where the eye can no longer respond normally when the laser is turned off. The result is a phenomenon called flash blindness.
Flash blindness is a temporary loss of vision that continues after a laser is turned off. After the exposure, there is an after image that varies in size and duration depending on the level of exposure and color of the laser. The effect is similar to what occurs after exposure to a camera flash, only it can be much greater in magnitude and duration. Even so, recovery time of functional vision is usually rapid. The after images lose strength quickly and can be seen through even though they may persist for several minutes. This illustrates safety distances for the visual effects from a green laser pointer of maximum legal power of 5 milliwatts. As you can see, it is extremely unlikely that a pointer could cause eye damage. The pointer would have to be within 50 feet of the pilot and maintained in focus on one spot on the retina for several seconds. Even though damage is unlikely, a laser pointer can produce the other visual effects at significant distances. The effects vary with range, with the strongest effect, flash blindness, occurring at the closest range. Are common pointers the only laser threat? Unfortunately, the answer is no. There are more powerful laser devices that are handheld and look very similar to regular pointers. These devices are not in the same class as laser pointers and are required in the U.S. to have safety features regular laser pointers do not. Some handheld lasers available on the open market are 100 times more powerful than the average laser pointer. They are also more expensive, but unfortunately, as technology improves, the prices are dropping. A recent ad for a 400 milliwatt handheld laser listed the price at $900. Although they are typically marketed for professional use, they are available to anyone who has the money to pay for them. How can I tell I am being illuminated by a laser? The most obvious distinction is that the laser light is of one bright color. The most common colors are green and red as shown here. In contrast, searchlights, spotlights, and landing lights of other aircraft are white in appearance.
Besides educating pilots, the FAA and the Department of Defense are also conducting research to better understand laser effects on pilot performance and to develop procedures to minimize the effects. Working together, they have outfitted a 737 simulator with both red and green lasers that track realistically as the aircraft maneuvers.
All of the in-the-cockpit scenes in this video were shot in this simulator. The outcome of this research has discovered that pilots subjected to laser events quickly learn the extent of the visual effects from exposures and how to work around them, even in the most challenging flight situations. The FAA, working with the DoD, is also exploring the possible use of laser eye protection, or LEP, in commercial aviation. Military pilots already wear LEP in laser hazard areas. LEP can block one or more wavelengths of laser light. Here the LEP filter removes the green light, as seen in the upper right part of the pilot's windscreen. The second filter blocks the red laser and has a different effect on the displays. Drawbacks to wearing LEP is that it makes the outside scene darker and alters the appearance of the cockpit's instrumentation and symbology. However, as shown here, despite the visual penalties, wearing laser eye protection may be a viable alternative to attempting other strategies to cope with the strike.
A couple of things that the pilot should remember when they're illuminated at a laser illumination is do not rub your eyes. Do not look into the beam. That's in areas that you can immediately help resolve some of the problem. If you can't look away from it, shield your eyes. Look down at your flight instruments. Turn your background lights up. This is a problem that some pilots have experienced to where they have been illuminated, they haven't been able to shield their eyes quickly enough, and they haven't been able to see their background lights on their instruments. Don't leave them down, turn them up. Some of the things you do want to do is get your autopilot on, communicate with the other pilot to transfer control of the aircraft, and to ascertain which one has the best visibility time. Make sure that you've contacted the tower. Make sure that you have control space for you to go fly into while you're resolving your vision impairment problems. And also check your aircraft, because during this time of the visual impairment, you may have been in a turn or in an unusual configuration to where you may have lost your airspeed, or you may have climbed up, or you may have descended rapidly, and you want to be able to reestablish the normal profile of the airplane. So this is why it's important to get your autopilot on, so it'll help restabilize the airplane while you're checking out what are the configurations that the aircraft is in now and what you want to return it to. So do make sure that you communicate, and communications is probably one of the most important things you can do.
There will always be new challenges to overcome to ensure flight safety. Becoming aware of laser illuminations has become one of them. Laser illumination should not evoke startle, and the information in this video should be used to guide an appropriate response. Help the FAA by reporting these incidents per the FAA Advisory Circular 70-2. Additional information may be obtained from these web addresses listed on the screen.
Approach W173. Inbound with people showing green lasers off at Hotel Roof out here about 10 mile out.
Definitely 173, no reports. They say you have one flipped out?
Yes, sir, just plain as could be. We're just about over the hotel now, wherever it's coming from, but we're coming right up on top of it.
Definitely 173, roger, so just off to your right quarter mile?
Can't really tell.
Definitely 173, roger, and said it was green, and just on the final, I'll pass that on, I guess.
Yeah, we were on about a 10 mile final, and it was definitely bright